On September 14, 1960, a nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, placed two identical twin boys into two separate baskets and carried them down two separate hallways and handed them to two separate families who had no idea the other existed. The boys were 3 days old. They weighed 5 pounds each. They had the same birthmark behind their left ear, a small crescent shape, no bigger than a thumbprint, the kind of detail that only a mother would memorize, and that these boys would never have a mother to memorize it, because the woman who gave birth to them, a 17-year-old named Clara Mae Johnson, hemorrhaged on the delivery table and died 41 minutes after her sons entered the world. No father was listed on the birth certificate. No next of kin was contacted. The hospital's social services department processed the boys as two individual surrendered infants and placed them into separate adoption pipelines. And nobody, not a single person in that building, documented that they were twins. The file for baby boy Johnson A went to a family in Savannah. The file for baby boy Johnson B went to a family in Detroit. And for 62 years, two men lived entire lives, childhoods, graduations, marriages, children, divorces, funerals, retirements, with identical faces, identical birthmarks, and identical holes in their chests, that neither one of them could explain, not knowing the other was alive. Until November 19, 2022, when 72-year-old William Carter from Savannah and 72-year-old Raymond Brooks from Detroit stood on the Family Feud stage 15 feet apart and saw their own face looking back at them for the first time. And Steve Harvey, standing between them, collapsed into a chair that a stagehand had to bring him, because his legs would not hold him and his hands were shaking too hard to hold his cards. And he wept in a way that 43 crew members and 200 audience members would later describe as the most human thing they had ever seen a man do on television. It was a Saturday in November, and neither William Carter nor Raymond Brooks knew why they were really there. William believed he had won a contest through his church in Savannah. His granddaughter Naomi had told him the church had entered families into a drawing for Family Feud tickets, and the Carters had been selected. Raymond believed his daughter Angela had surprised him with the trip for his 72nd birthday. Angela had told him she wanted to do something special, something he would never forget. Both of these stories were lies. Carefully constructed, meticulously coordinated lies built over 8 months by two women who had never met in person but had spoken on the phone over 300 times since a DNA website sent them both an email that contained 12 words that detonated two families simultaneously. Your DNA sample has matched with a close biological relative, full sibling. But nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen. William Carter was adopted by Henry and Mabel Carter of Savannah in February 1961. He was 5 months old. The Carters were a quiet family. Henry worked at the port. Mabel taught Sunday school. They raised William in a shotgun house on West 38th Street, with a pecan tree in the backyard that William climbed every day until he was 12, and fell and broke his wrist. And Mabel said that was God telling him to stay on the ground. William grew up believing he was an only child. He knew he was adopted. The Carters never hid it. But they told him what the agency had told them, that his birth mother had died and that no other family members had been identified. William accepted this. He didn't search. He didn't question. He built his life on the ground he was given. He joined the Army at 18. He served in Vietnam. He came home. He married a woman named Pauline in 1984. They had 2 children. He worked 31 years as a postal carrier, walking the same route in Savannah 6 days a week, until his knees gave out and the VA said he needed a replacement, and he said he'd rather limp than let someone cut him open. He retired in 2015. Pauline died of pancreatic cancer in 2017. William moved into a smaller house closer to Naomi and started attending the 6 a.m. service at First African Baptist Church every Sunday because the house was too quiet and the early morning congregation was small enough that nobody asked him questions he didn't want to answer. Raymond Brooks was adopted by Samuel and Estelle Brooks of Detroit in April 1961. He was 7 months old. The Brooks family was larger, louder, full of uncles and aunts and cousins who filled the house on Sundays. Samuel worked at the Ford River Rouge plant. Estelle was a hairdresser who operated out of the kitchen on Saturdays. Raymond grew up surrounded by people. He was never alone, but he felt alone in a way he could never articulate, in a way that made no sense given the noise and warmth of the Brooks household. He described it once to Angela as feeling like a radio that was tuned almost to the right station, but not quite. Close enough to hear the music, too far to make out the words. He knew he was adopted. Like William, he never searched. He became an electrician. He married a woman named Gwen in 1986. They had 3 children. He divorced in 2002. He worked. He watched his children grow. He retired. He moved into an apartment in Dearborn with a cat named Bishop and a collection of jazz records that took up an entire wall, and a habit of waking at 4:30 in the morning for no reason he could explain, and sitting in his kitchen in the dark, and feeling like he was waiting for something he couldn't name. And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. In 2019, Angela bought Raymond a DNA testing kit for Christmas. She thought it would be fun. Maybe they'd find some distant cousins. Maybe they'd learn something about his heritage. Raymond spit in the tube and forgot about it. 6 weeks later, the results came back. Raymond had standard ancestry results. West African, some European. Nothing surprising. But attached to the results was a notification he almost didn't open. A relative match. Not a cousin, not a distant connection. A full sibling. A brother. Living in Savannah, Georgia, Raymond called Angela. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the phone. He said, "It says I have a brother." Angela drove to his apartment. They sat together and stared at the screen. The match was listed under the name Naomi Carter. She had tested 3 months earlier, uploading her grandfather William's DNA because she was researching family history for a school project and wanted to trace his biological roots. Angela sent Naomi a message through the platform. Naomi saw it the next morning. She didn't respond for 2 days because she sat with the information the way a person sits with something that might be a gift or might be an earthquake, and she couldn't tell which until she understood the shape of it. Then she called Angela. Their first conversation lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. They compared photographs. William and Raymond were identical, not similar, identical. The same jawline, the same forehead, the same slight gap between the front teeth, the same crescent birthmark behind the left ear. 2 men who had lived 734 miles apart for 72 years and looked more alike than some people who shared the same bedroom. Naomi and Angela spent 8 months planning what came next. They confirmed the match through a second DNA test. They contacted the hospital. Grady Memorial had digitized its records, and after 4 months of requests, a records clerk found the original intake file from September 1960. 2 male infants, mother deceased, no father listed, processed separately. The clerk said the file showed no indication that the infants had been documented as twins. No note, no flag, no cross-reference. 2 boys, born minutes apart, separated by paperwork and silence, and a system that processed human beings the way a factory processes parts. They contacted Family Feud producers in May 2022. The producers assigned a senior segment producer named Diane, who spent 3 months coordinating the logistics with the precision of a military operation. William and Raymond would each be told a different cover story. They would each arrive at the studio with their families at different times. They would be kept in separate green rooms on opposite sides of the building. Neither would know the other was in the building until the moment Steve Harvey brought them together on stage. Steve Harvey was briefed 6 hours before taping. He sat in his dressing room with Diane and read the file. He read about Clara Mae Johnson, 17 years old, dead on a delivery table. He read about the 2 baskets and the 2 hallways. He read about the crescent birthmarks and the 62 years and the DNA match. He closed the file and sat without speaking for a long time. Diane asked him if he was okay. Steve said, "I've done this show for a lot of years. I've seen surprises. I've seen reunions. I've seen things that made me emotional. But I have never held a piece of paper that made me feel the way this piece of paper just made me feel." He paused. "These men don't know each other exists. They've been breathing the same air on the same planet for 72 years, and nobody told them. Nobody." He pressed his palm against his forehead and said, "How do you prepare for that? How do you stand between 2 people who should have grown up together and say, 'Here's your brother. Sorry about the 62 years. Diane said, "You don't prepare. You just be Steve." The Booker family from Memphis, a lively, warm crew of 6, served as the ostensible competing family for the taping. But there was no real game that day. The producers had structured the taping as a special episode, though neither William nor Raymond knew that. Steve Harvey would later call what happened next the most important moment of his career. William's family was brought to the stage first. William, Naomi, and 3 family members took their positions. William was smiling, shaking hands with the audience, telling Naomi he couldn't believe he was actually on television at 72 years old. He adjusted his tie 4 times. It was a blue tie. Pauline had given it to him 11 years ago, and he wore it to every event that mattered, because wearing it meant she was still dressing him, still choosing for him, still present in the small ways that outlive a person. Steve played 1 partial round. Light. Easy. William was charming and humble and called Steve "young man," even though Steve was only 8 years younger, and the audience adored him instantly. Steve laughed. The crew laughed. Everything felt normal. Then Steve stopped the game. He walked to center stage. The lights shifted. The board went dark. The audience, who had been briefed in advance with a written card asking for absolute silence at a specific signal, went quiet. Steve said, "Mr. Carter, I need to ask you something personal, if that's all right." William nodded. "At my age, son, everything's personal." Steve smiled, but his eyes were already changing. "You were adopted, is that right?" "That's right. 1961. Best parents God ever made." "And you were told you had no biological family." William's smile dimmed slightly. "That's what they said. Mama died having me. Nobody else came forward." Steve nodded slowly. He looked at the floor. He pressed his lips together. Then he said, "Mr. Carter, what if I told you they were wrong?" The studio fell completely silent. William's face didn't change at first. The way a face doesn't change in the first half-second after receiving information that will eventually rearrange everything behind it. Then his eyebrows moved, slightly, upward, and his right hand went to his left ring finger, where Pauline's ring still sat, and he turned it once. What do you mean, wrong? Steve said, I mean that on September 14th, 1960, at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, your mother, Clara Mae Johnson, did not give birth to one baby boy. She gave birth to two. William's hand stopped moving. His entire body stopped moving. He stood completely still, the way a person stands when the ground beneath them has just become uncertain. Two, he said. Twin boys, Steve said. Identical. And the hospital separated you. They put you in separate baskets. They sent you down separate hallways. They gave you to separate families. And they never told anyone you were twins. William's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Naomi grabbed his arm. Her face was already wet. She had known for 8 months and held it the way a person holds a grenade, carefully, terrified, certain that the explosion would be worth the shaking. Steve's voice was barely holding. Mr. Carter, your brother's name is Raymond Brooks. He lives in Detroit. He is 72 years old. He has the same face as you. He has the same birthmark behind his left ear. He has been alive for every single day of your life, and neither one of you knew. William's hand went to his mouth. His chest heaved once. He looked at Naomi and said, You knew? Naomi nodded. She couldn't speak. She was crying too hard. William looked back at Steve. His voice cracked down the center. Where is he? Steve said, He's here, Mr. Carter. He's been here the whole time. Steve turned toward the entrance at the back of the stage and raised his hand. Raymond Brooks walked out from behind the partition. He was wearing a gray suit. His hands were at his sides. His jaw was clenched so tight the tendons in his neck were visible from the 6th row. Angela was behind him, one hand on his back, guiding him the way you guide someone who can see perfectly well but has temporarily lost the ability to trust their own eyes. Raymond had been told 3 minutes earlier. Diane had walked into his green room and said, Mr. Brooks, I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down. He did not sit down. He stood. He listened. He learned that he had a twin brother, that his brother was on the other side of the wall, that he was about to walk through a door and see his own face for the first time in 72 years. Raymond's only response was to close his eyes and say, very quietly, So, that's what it was. That's what I was waiting for. Raymond walked to center stage. William was standing at the podium, 15 feet apart. 2 men, same height, same build, same jawline, same gap between the front teeth, same crescent birthmark behind the left ear that they wouldn't discover until later, in the green room, when Raymond turned his head and William saw it and touched his own and made a sound that Naomi would describe as the shortest, most complete prayer she had ever heard. They stood 15 feet apart and looked at each other, and the studio fell completely silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not a breath. 200 people and 43 crew members and 4 cameras locked on 2 old men in suits who were seeing something impossible. They were seeing themselves, not a photograph, not a screen, a living, breathing, standing person who had their nose and their forehead and their hands and 62 years of unlived memories between them. William spoke first. His voice was destroyed. He said, "You look like me." Raymond said, "You look like me." And then neither of them moved for what felt like a very long time, but was actually only 4 seconds. Because on the 5th second, William opened his arms and Raymond crossed those 15 feet, and they collided. Not embraced, collided, the way 2 objects that were separated by force returned to each other with force. They held each other on that stage, and their bodies shook, and Raymond's hand went to the back of William's head, and William's hand went to the back of Raymond's neck, and they held on the way you hold something you just found out you've been missing your entire life. Steve Harvey did not stand. He was in a chair that a stagehand had carried onto the stage because Steve's legs had given out 30 seconds earlier. He sat in that chair and wept. Not television crying, not dignified single-tear cut-to-commercial crying. He wept with his whole body, his head down, his hands gripping the arms of the chair, his shoulders shaking in a way that was visible from the last row. A makeup artist standing off stage started crying. Then a grip. Then a lighting tech. Then the stage manager. Within 60 seconds, every person on the production crew was either crying openly or had turned away from the stage because they couldn't watch and hold themselves together at the same time. The Booker family was standing on the opposite side of the stage. Every single one of them was crying. The youngest Booker, a 19-year-old named Darius, was holding his twin sister Destiny's hand. They looked at each other and then looked at William and Raymond, and Destiny squeezed Darius's hand so hard he winced, but he didn't let go. William and Raymond held each other for 3 minutes and 41 seconds. A producer timed it. Nobody interrupted them. Nobody would have dared. When they finally separated, William held Raymond at arm's length and studied his face the way a man studies something he's going to need to remember. He said, 72 years. Raymond said, 72 years. William said, I woke up every morning at 5:15 and I didn't know why. Raymond's face changed. Something moved behind his eyes. He said, 4:30. Every morning. I sit in my kitchen in the dark, and I feel like I'm waiting for something. William stared at him. You were waiting for me. Raymond said, I was waiting for you. But Steve wasn't done. He pulled himself out of the chair. He stood on legs that he would later say felt like they belonged to someone else. He walked to William and Raymond and stood beside them and said, I need to tell you both something, and I need everyone in this room and everyone watching at home to hear it. He paused. He breathed. When I was at my lowest, when everything was gone and I couldn't see tomorrow, I wrote a goodbye letter to my family. I was ready to mail it. I was ready to be done. His voice dropped. The studio was silent in a way that silence shouldn't be possible in a room with 200 people. And the only reason I didn't mail that letter is because something inside me said, wait. Not hope, not faith, not even courage. Just wait. I didn't know what I was waiting for. I just knew I wasn't finished. And I held on. He looked at William. He looked at Raymond. You two have been waiting your whole lives, and today, the waiting is over. And I need every person watching this who is sitting in the dark at 4:30 in the morning, feeling like something is missing, to hear me when I say this. You are not crazy. Something is coming. You don't know what it is. You don't know when. But something is coming. And it is worth the wait. But Steve wasn't done. He pulled out his phone. On stage. He called a woman named Dr. Sharon Mitchell, an adoption records specialist and reunification counselor at a non-profit called Found Together. He said, Dr. Mitchell, my name is Steve Harvey. I have 2 brothers standing on my stage who were separated at birth 72 years ago by a hospital system that failed them. I am personally funding a full genealogical investigation into their birth mother's family. I want them to know every relative, every cousin, every connection that was stolen from them, and I want Found Together to handle every separated sibling case you can find. Whatever it costs, I'm covering the first 2 years. Dr. Mitchell on speakerphone was crying. She said, Mr. Harvey, we have over 4,000 open cases of adopted siblings searching for each other. This will change everything. Steve said, Good, that's the point. He turned to the Booker family. Mr. Booker, the patriarch, was wiping his face with a handkerchief. Darius and Destiny were still holding hands. Steve walked over and said, "You came to play a game. What you got is something no game can give you. Both families win today." He handed the Booker family a check for $20,000. Destiny looked at Darius and said, loud enough for the microphones to catch, "Don't ever let me go." Darius said, "Never." Steve heard it. He turned away from the camera because his face was not ready to be seen again. Steve walked to the front of the stage and looked directly into the camera. Everyone watching at home, there are people on this planet right now who share your blood, your face, your birthday, and they don't know you're alive. Not because they don't care, because a system failed, because a form was filled out wrong, because a hallway went left instead of right. If you have ever felt like something was missing, if you have ever woken up in the dark and felt like you were waiting for something you couldn't name, I am telling you right now, search. Take the test. Make the call. Open the door. Because on the other side of that door might be a man who looks exactly like you, who has been sitting in his own kitchen, in his own dark, waiting for the exact same thing. The episode aired on January 8, 2023. Within 6 hours, the clip of William and Raymond seeing each other for the first time had been viewed 512 million times, making it the most viewed moment in the history of American daytime television. The hashtag 62 years trended in 89 countries for 27 consecutive days. DNA testing companies reported a combined 840% increase in sibling match testing kits sold in the month following the broadcast. Adoption records reform legislation was introduced in 4 states within 60 days of the episode airing, with 2 states citing the Wallace brothers' case directly in committee hearings. Steve Harvey, Naomi Carter, and Angela Brooks established the Two Hallways Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to reuniting siblings separated by adoption, institutional error, and systemic failures in the foster care and hospital systems. Within 2 years, the foundation raised $41.2 million and successfully reunited 1,247 sibling pairs across the United States. Its flagship program funded DNA testing and genealogical research for adoptees who could not afford it. A second program partnered with state vital records agencies in 22 states to audit and cross-reference adoption files from the 1940s through the 1980s, the decades with the highest rates of undocumented sibling separations. The genealogical investigation Steve funded revealed that Clara Mae Johnson had 2 surviving sisters, both of whom were alive and living in rural Alabama. They were 79 and 82 years old. Neither had known Clara Mae was pregnant. Neither had known she died. They had been told she left for Atlanta and didn't come back, and the family assumed what families assumed in 1960 when a 17-year-old girl disappeared. William and Raymond met their aunts on Easter Sunday, 2023, in a small house outside Selma. The older aunt, Betty, looked at William's face and then at Raymond's face, and then sat down in a chair and said, "Lord, she did make it. She's right there in both your faces." She touched William's cheek with a hand that was shaking. She touched Raymond's cheek with the same hand. And she said, "Your mama had a gap in her teeth, too." William moved from Savannah to Dearborn, Michigan in June 2023. He rented an apartment 4 blocks from Raymond's. They have coffee together every morning, not at 5:15, not at 4:30, at 5 o'clock even, a time that belongs to neither of them and both of them, a time they chose together. Raymond plays jazz records. William reads the paper. Some mornings they talk for 2 hours. Some mornings they don't talk at all. They are learning that brotherhood is not a memory. It is a practice. And 72 years of silence does not make the first word any less important. It makes it more. In a 2024 interview with 60 Minutes, the correspondent asked William and Raymond the same questions separately, in different rooms, without telling the other. What was the first thing you thought when you saw your brother's face? William said, I thought, there I am. Raymond said, I thought, there I am. The correspondent played both answers for them together. They looked at each other. They didn't say anything. They just laughed. The same laugh, at the same time, the way they would have laughed every day if a hallway hadn't turned left instead of right on a September morning in 1960. In a 2024 interview with Gayle King, Steve Harvey was asked to describe the moment he broke down on stage. Steve was quiet for so long that Gayle started to ask a follow-up question. Steve raised his hand gently. He wasn't done. He said, I've spent my whole career making people laugh, and I'm proud of that. But on that day, on that stage, I wasn't a host. I wasn't a comedian. I wasn't Steve Harvey. I was a man standing between two brothers who should have learned to ride bikes together and fight over toys together and grow old together. And instead, they lived 72 years without knowing. And when they looked at each other and said, You look like me, I understood something I had been circling my whole life. The thing we're all looking for is not success or money or fame. It's the face that matches ours. The person who makes the waiting make sense. And for some people, that takes 72 years. And it's still worth it. Today there are 2 coffee cups on a kitchen table in an apartment in Dearborn, Michigan. They don't match. One is white ceramic with a chipped handle that William brought from Savannah. The other is a blue diner mug Raymond bought at a thrift store in 1994 because it felt right in his hand. Every morning at 5, 2 73-year-old men sit across from each other and drink coffee in a kitchen that smells like jazz records and newsprint and something older than both of them. They don't always talk. They don't need to. They have already said the only thing that needed to be said, which is nothing, which is presence, which is the sound of 2 cups being set down on the same table at the same time by 2 men who spent 72 years on opposite sides of a wall that was never supposed to be there. Some lives are separated by choice. Some are separated by war. Some are separated by distance or time, or the quiet cruelties that systems inflict on people too small to fight back. And some lives are separated by a hallway. A single hallway in a hospital in Atlanta, where a nurse turned left with one basket and right with another, and 2 boys began 2 lives that should have been one. You cannot give those years back. You cannot undo the mornings, or return the holidays, or fill the silence where a brother's voice should have been. But you can pour a cup of coffee at 5 a.m. in Dearborn, Michigan. You can sit across from the face you were meant to know. And you can let the waiting, finally, mercifully, be over. If that story just rearranged something inside you, subscribe right now. Every single week, we deliver Family Feud moments that break you open and put you back together different. The next one is coming in 7 days, and I promise you, it is going to hit like this one. Tap that notification bell. We're just getting started.